Hi! This story is at my daughter's birthday. My mother-in-law called me a leech. They didn't know I owned the company. I hope you enjoy it. Vanilla. Suffocating thick vanilla cut through with the sharp chemical floral of Estee Lauder white linen. The strike of a heel against hardwood. Once, twice, like a metronome. High-pitched laughter echoing off a vaulted ceiling. Eyes clinking against crystal. The heavy hum of a dozen overlapping conversations. My fingers were completely numb. The sharp corner of a wrapped cardboard box dug into my right palm right where the skin was softest, but I squeezed it tighter anyway. Disorientation. I stood just inside the heavy double doors, letting the wall of noise wash over me. 36 years old. A freelance certified public accountant who spent her days organizing chaos into perfect balanced ledgers. But right now my chest was tight and my breathing was shallow. 7 minutes late, not because of traffic on the Kettering roads, because I had parked my car in the lot outside and sat with the engine running for a full 10 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, gathering the pieces of myself and locking them away behind a quiet expression before walking inside. 8 years of marriage to Vernon Norwood meant developing survival strategies. The parking lot delay was mine. Nobody knew about it. I looked up trying to ground myself. A large banner hung slightly crooked on the far wall. Happy 7th birthday, Lily. Beneath the banner stood Birchwood Event Hall. Lorraine had chosen it because the online reviews called it the premier venue in the area. My mother had chosen the name because she said it sounded sturdy and American. Two completely different reasons. The exact same building. I stepped fully into the foyer. My eyes flicked up instinctively. Top right corner, tucked near the crown molding. The security camera. A small red light blinked quietly in the shadows. 2 years ago, I had called the technician and instructed him to adjust that specific lens 15 degrees to the left so it would properly cover the main bar and the seating area. Nobody else in the room knew about that blind spot adjustment. You only notice those things when you own the walls the cameras are bolted to. I scanned the room for my daughter before I even bothered looking for my husband. I found her in the corner near the gift table. Her pink dress already carried a heavy smudge of white frosting near the hem. She turned and her face lit up with absolute joy. That single look was the only thing that kept me walking into these rooms year after year. Mom? She grabbed my free hand, pulling me toward the main tables. You made it. Grandma said you were going to be late again. I'm right on time, sweetie. I smoothed her hair down, keeping my voice perfectly level. Your grandmother just likes to set the clocks a little early. Grandma says she picked this whole place out. She said it cost a lot of money to rent. I paused for a fraction of a second. Did she? Well, are you having a good time? The best time. We have a cake with a fondant unicorn. A real unicorn, Mom. A lot of money. Lorraine was right about that. $4,200 for the main hall, the private catering, and the upgraded lighting package. She had paid with a cashier's check. That check had cleared into the business account of Callahan Property LLC 3 weeks ago. My account. I had never mentioned it to Vernon. Vernon stood near the bar. He held a glass of dark scotch in his right hand. He saw me, and his mouth tightened into a smile. I had spent 8 years learning to translate that specific smile. It was the expression of a man who had just received instructions he didn't like, but had already agreed to follow blindly. His mother had gotten to him first. Then the white linen hit me. Lorraine appeared from behind the catering station. She wore a pastel purple silk blouse pressed to a razor edge. A heavy silver brooch pinned near her collars caught the overhead light. She stopped and looked at me from my shoes to my hair. She wasn't judging my outfit. She was inspecting the room, looking for flaws in her perfect staging. Wren. She didn't say hello. She stated my name like a fact she was displeased to confirm. Lorraine. I offered a polite, hollow smile. The venue looks lovely. She nodded, adjusting a heavy diamond ring on her left hand. I have an eye for these things. I didn't correct her. I set Lily's gift on the back table and found my assigned seat. Lorraine had printed and laminated a seating chart. My name sat at the very end of the overflow table, directly next to the swinging wooden door of the women's restroom. I pulled the chair out and sat down. This was my daughter's birthday party, inside my own building, and I was sitting next to the toilets. An hour passed in a blur of forced smiles and small talk. Then came the sound. 3 sharp taps of a silver spoon against a crystal champagne flute. The sound cut through the low hum of conversation, and the room went silent faster than gravity. 50 people turned their heads. Neighbors, Vernon's friends from the golf club, clients from his family's home renovation business. They all knew the drill when Lorraine Norwood asked for the room. Helen Pratt, a neighbor I barely knew, sat at table 4. She paused with a glass of lemonade halfway to her mouth, waiting. Vernon stood right beside his mother. He still held the same glass of scotch. He looked at the floor. He looked at the far wall. He did not look at me. I placed my hands flat on the table. My left thumb tapped the wood once. Then I held perfectly still. Lorraine started with Lily, of course. She smiled, her voice rich and practiced, projecting easily over the crowd. She talked about the beautiful little girl, about family traditions, about the legacy the Norwood family was building for the next generation. It was a good speech. Until she pivoted. Her tone shifted. The sweetness hardened into something brittle and sharp. I also want to talk about the true meaning of family, Lorraine said, gripping her glass. It is not just about blood. It is about contribution. Someone at the next table set their fork down loudly. A man coughed into his napkin. The Norwood family was built by people who work, she continued, her eyes scanning the crowd before locking dead onto me. People who build things, not people who simply sit back and take. Helen Pratt lowered her lemonade slowly to the table. Some people in this life choose to attach themselves to things that do not belong to them. Lorraine kept her practiced smile, raising her glass an inch higher. Like a leech, attaching, draining, and calling it a marriage. The silence in the room became absolute, a thick, heavy vacuum that sucked the air out of my lungs. Lily looked at me from across the room. She was only 7, but children feel the temperature drop even if they don't understand the weather. Mom, Vernon whispered. Barely a breath. Anyway, Lorraine said, turning brightly back to the room. Happy birthday to our Lily. We love you so much. 50 people stood frozen. A few raised their glasses out of sheer reflex, staring awkwardly at the tablecloths. A leech. She had used that word out loud. In front of 50 guests. Inside the walls of my own property. The strangest part was that I didn't feel the sting right away. My chest didn't heave and my eyes didn't water. Instead, a massive quiet clarity washed over me. It felt like standing in a freezing shower. For 8 years, I had tried to balance the ledger of this family. I had swallowed insults, stayed out of the way, made myself small so they could feel big. I thought my silence was patience. I realized sitting in that stiff wooden chair that my silence was just a blank check. I kept letting them cash. Today, the account was closed. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't knock my chair backward. I picked up my water glass. Thank you, Lorraine, I said. My voice carried clearly across the room, perfectly steady. Thank you all for coming. Lily, come over here by Mom. Lily ran over, burying her face in my side. I rested my hand on her small shoulder, feeling her tremble slightly. Do you want to sing the song first, or do you want to eat that unicorn right now? I asked her, completely ignoring the 50 adults staring at us. Sing first, Lily whispered, then eat. Okay. I took a breath and started singing. Happy birthday to you. For 3 seconds, I sang alone in the cavernous hall. Then Helen Pratt joined in from table 4. Then a neighbor from across the street. Within 10 seconds, the entire room was singing, their voices rising together, completely drowning out whatever Lorraine had planned to say next. Lorraine stood near the bar with her champagne, her grand moment erased by a nursery rhyme. We finished the song. Lily blew out all 7 candles in one huge breath. The room erupted into applause, the tension breaking into scattered cheers. I kept my hand on my daughter's shoulder and let my eyes drift toward the bar. Lorraine was staring at me. Vernon was standing right beside her, watching me with a pale, nervous face. They didn't look away, and neither did I. 45 minutes later, the overhead lights dimmed down to a warm amber glow. The catering staff brought out the coffee urns and a playlist of soft pop music pulsed from the corner speakers. I stood at the dessert station, slicing another piece of the fondant cake for Lily. My half-full glass of Prosecco sat abandoned on the edge of the nearest cocktail table. Lorraine was standing right next to that table, her back angled toward the room. Vernon stood directly in front of her. His broad shoulders created a perfect blind spot, shielding his mother from the crowd. I never intended to watch them. Lily tugged on my sleeve, asking which piece of the cake had the most frosting. When I raised my head to answer her, my line of sight slipped straight through the narrow gap between Vernon's shoulder and Lorraine's arm. Her right hand moved. She held a tiny white paper packet. She hadn't pulled it from a pocket. It had slipped from the sleeve of her blouse or the edge of her clutch. A quick practice flick of her wrist positioned it directly over my Prosecco glass. A dusting of white powder fell into the pale liquid and vanished instantly. She didn't even look down. She kept her eyes locked on Vernon's face, talking to him casually, her mouth moving in a steady rhythm. And Vernon smiled. He nodded, shifting his weight, holding the shield steady for her. 1, 2, 3. I counted the seconds it took for my brain to process the visual data. I didn't gasp. I didn't drop the cake knife. It was simply a matter of the raw information needing 3 seconds to translate into reality. My mother-in-law had just dropped an unknown substance into my drink at a child's birthday party. My husband had watched her do it. He had smiled. I looked down at Lily. She was pointing eagerly at a sugar flower. "You can name that one," I told her, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. I wiped the knife on a napkin. I walked over to the cocktail table. I didn't hurry, and my hands didn't shake. I picked up my glass of Prosecco. I felt the cold condensation on the stem. I turned around. Renee Norwood, Vernon's younger sister, sat at the next table. She was bent over her phone, scrolling rapidly. A completely untouched glass of Prosecco sat near her elbow. "Renee," I said quietly, stepping up to her chair. "Are you going to drink that? I see you haven't touched it." She glanced up, looking mildly annoyed by the interruption. "Yeah, eventually. Take it if you want it." "No, I have one." I kept my tone perfectly helpful, offering a soft smile. "I just meant yours is getting warm. Let me grab you a fresh one from the bar." Before she could argue, I reached down and swapped the glasses. I slid my tainted drink directly in front of her and picked up her fresh one. It was a smooth, entirely natural movement, a polite hostess doing a favor. Renee blinked, surprised by the service. "Oh, thanks, Ren." I took the clean glass to the bar, took a sip, and set it down. Then I looked back across the room. Lorraine was chatting with a guest, gesturing grandly toward the high wooden beams of the ceiling, showing off the beautiful venue she had rented. Vernon caught my eye for a fraction of a second, then looked away so fast his drink sloshed over the rim of his glass. I didn't know what was in the glass I had just given away. I didn't know the dosage, and I didn't know the consequences. But I knew exactly one thing. I was not going to collapse on the hardwood floor and let my daughter watch emergency medics carry her mother out of her own birthday party. And I knew one other thing. The security camera in the upper right corner had a perfect unobstructed view of the bar. It was recording everything. 15 minutes later, Renee stood up from her table abruptly. She dropped her phone, grabbed her stomach, and stumbled blindly toward the restroom. She didn't come out for 20 minutes. The party kept moving. I drank my water. I smiled at the guests. I helped Lily tear the wrapping paper off her gifts, but deep inside my chest, something ancient and heavy finally snapped off its hinges. The pale yellow light of the bedside lamp washed over the duvet, casting long bruised shadows across the fabric. The entire house sat wrapped in silence, broken only by the heavy rushing sound of water from the master bathroom. My husband had been standing under the shower spray for 20 minutes trying to scrub away the tension of a completely derailed birthday party. My phone vibrated against the wooden nightstand, the sudden noise making the wood rattle. The screen lit up in the dim room. A message from Vernon sent from the urgent care waiting room an hour ago, right before he finally came home. "Renee is fine. The doctor said nothing is wrong, probably an adverse reaction or too much alcohol." I stared at those glowing green letters. Renee rarely drank, and she had barely touched her glass before collapsing. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, and I kept my breathing slow and deliberate as I typed my response. Did she drink anything strange? I watched the screen. No reply came. The water kept running in the bathroom. I pushed myself off the mattress and walked over to the bathroom door. The steam was already rolling out from underneath the frame, smelling heavily of his expensive cedar body wash. I knocked once hard. Vernon, I called out, raising my voice just enough to cut through the noise. The water abruptly shut off. The heavy glass shower door squeaked on its metal hinges. Yeah, he answered, his voice echoing against the ceramic tile. I told you she's fine. The clinic is sending her home with some fluids. What caused it? Renee is always sensitive to different foods. The exhaustion in his voice sounded practiced, like a script he had rehearsed on the dark drive back. You know exactly how she gets. She only drank Prosecco. Well, maybe there was something wrong with the catering company. He shifted behind the frosted glass, the sound of a towel snapping against the rack ringing out. They do not always wash those glasses right. She drank my glass. The thought bloomed in the center of my mind, cold and perfectly formed, carrying the heavy weight of a stone. I did not say the words out loud. I did not scream through the painted wood of the door, and I did not demand the truth he was actively hiding. Instead, I walked slowly back to the bed. I placed my phone face down on the nightstand so I would not have to look at his empty reassurances anymore. I lay back against the pillows and stared directly up at the ceiling, watching the yellow light fade into the shadows, calculating exactly what the next week of my life was going to require. Sunday morning arrived with a harsh, blinding white light that spilled aggressively through the kitchen windows. I had been awake since 3 in the morning, listening to the house settle and creak. 2 ceramic mugs sat on the granite island counter, both filled with coffee that had gone completely cold 2 hours ago. From the living room, the erratic, cheerful sounds of a cartoon played at a low volume. Lily was camped on the rug in her pajamas, blissfully oblivious to the heavy silence pressing down on the rest of the house. Vernon walked into the kitchen, wearing his gray sweatpants and a faded college shirt. He rubbed the back of his neck, reached blindly for his mug, took a sip, and immediately grimaced at the bitter temperature. I watched his hand set the cup back down on the stone surface. Did you see what your mother put in my glass yesterday? I did not raise my voice. I did not tremble. I asked the question with the exact same level tone I used when asking a client about a missing tax receipt. Vernon froze. His hand stayed hovering over the counter for 3 full seconds. For a man who prided himself on always having a quick, charming answer for any problem, that hesitation was a massive, glaring admission. You saw it wrong, he finally said. He pulled his hand back and crossed his arms over his chest, building a physical barrier between us. Answer the question, Vernon. My mother did not do anything. He shifted his weight from his left foot to his right, looking toward the hallway instead of meeting my eyes. You are always so sensitive when it comes to her. You constantly look for reasons to be upset about my family. Your sister was taken to an urgent care clinic last night. Renee catches every stomach bug that goes around, and you know that. I leaned forward slightly, resting my palms flat against the cool granite of the island. You smiled. You stood there right in front of her, and you smiled while she did it. The kitchen went completely silent. Even the cartoon in the other room seemed to pause for a breath. My husband stared at me, his jaw working back and forth as he searched for a lifeline. What exactly are you accusing me of? I looked at the man I had married 8 years ago, stripping away all the history and the shared holidays and the wedding vows. I really looked at him. I did not see a cruel enemy. I simply saw a man who had spent his entire 39 years on earth choosing the path of least resistance. His mother was a force of nature who demanded absolute control, and I was just the quiet wife who never made a scene. He had assumed, as he always did, that I would be the easier person to disappoint. He chose his own comfort over my basic safety, and he did not even realize how monumental that choice was. It was not an accusation. It was the final confirmation of a rotting foundation. That is fine, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet whisper. You just make yourself comfortable. I picked up my cold coffee, turned my back on him, and walked out of the kitchen. The house finally settled into darkness around 8 o'clock that evening. I sat on the edge of Lily's narrow twin bed, a worn paperback resting on my knees. I had just finished reading the 3rd chapter, and her eyelids were drooping, fighting a losing battle against sleep. The small bedside lamp cast a soft, warm glow over her tangled dark hair. "Mom," she whispered, her voice rough with exhaustion. "Yes, sweetie." I kept my hand flat on the page, waiting patiently. She pulled her quilted blankets up to her chin, her small fingers gripping the edge of the fabric. "I saw Grandma put something white in your drink yesterday." The air in the bedroom seemed to stop moving entirely. I carefully closed the book and set it on the nightstand, making sure my movements remained slow and deliberate so I would not frighten her. "Did you see it clearly?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle and entirely conversational. "Very clear," Lily nodded, her dark eyes wide and completely serious. "You were looking the other way at the cake, but I was sitting much closer." I swallowed the dry lump forming in my throat. "Have you mentioned this to anyone else?" "No." She shook her head against her pillow. "I saw Dad looking too." He smiled. I leaned down and pressed a long, lingering kiss against her forehead. Her skin was warm, smelling faintly of lavender shampoo and childhood innocence. She was the only clean, honest thing left in this entire family, and I realized in that moment exactly what I had to protect. "You go to sleep now," I told her softly, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "I love you so much." "Are you okay, Mom?" "I am perfectly fine. I just need to think about a few things." I waited until her breathing leveled out into the deep, steady rhythm of sleep. I sat in the dark of her bedroom for 10 full minutes without moving a single muscle. The internal debate was entirely over. There was no more hoping for a simple misunderstanding. There was no more rationalizing his behavior. I stood up, walked across the hall to my small home office, and opened my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue glow over my wooden desk. I opened a new message window and typed out a single line to my old college roommate, a forensic accountant living down in Cincinnati. "Paula, I need to talk. Can you come up tomorrow?" I hit send, closed the lid, and listened to the satisfying final click of the latch locking into place. Monday morning arrived with a heavy overcast sky that threatened rain but never delivered. By 9 o'clock, the drive to the Birchwood event hall ended in a completely empty parking lot. Calling ahead to speak with the property manager was entirely unnecessary. My heavy brass key slid into the side entrance lock, turning with a solid, satisfying click, and the heavy metal door swung open into the dark building. The space carried an entirely different weight without 50 people filling it. The heavy scent of vanilla candles and expensive floral perfume had completely faded. In their place, the deep grounded smell of polished oak and industrial floor wax hung in the cool air. My low heels tapped softly against the wood as I walked past the vacant main hall, heading straight up the narrow back staircase to the small management office. The room was cramped, barely large enough for a wooden desk and a metal filing cabinet. Sitting down in the worn leather chair, I moved the mouse to wake up the security monitor. The computer fan whirred to life, creating a steady mechanical hum in the silent room. The screen glowed bright against my face. The resolution was only average, but it was perfectly clear for what the situation required. The system archive loaded slowly. Typing in the date, my fingers were completely steady. The timeline slider moved to 40 minutes past 5 in the afternoon. Camera angle 3 covered the entire bar and the main seating area. The footage played out in absolute silence. Lorraine stood right by the cocktail tables. Vernon remained perfectly positioned to block the crowd. From the dim quiet of the office, the glowing screen showed her opening that small clutch. Her right hand moved in a quick practiced motion. A tiny plastic bag appeared. White powder fell straight into my drink. Then Vernon smiled. Watching those 47 seconds happen all over again brought no sudden wave of satisfaction. No vindication washed over me. The tightness in my chest from the weekend was gone, entirely replaced by a cold operational focus. The powder on the screen was dark white. What color was zolpidem? That required a specific internet search. It also required a phone call to Paula. Exporting the video file took only a few moments. The data copied over to a small black drive hidden deep in my purse. A second copy uploaded directly to my private cloud storage. Finally, my email application opened, attaching the file to a message sent straight to my own address. The subject line was simple. The party watched the right corner. Then a sudden memory surfaced. The neighbor, Helen Pratt. The timeline scrubbed backward. Table 4 came into view. Helen sat there with her glass of lemonade. At exactly 43 minutes past 5, she lowered her glass. She leaned down toward the table. Her cellular phone was not sitting flat on the tablecloth. She held it angled upward. The camera lens on her device pointed directly at the main bar. She was taking a picture or a video. A slow breath escaped my lips, the sound loud in the quiet room. A witness existed. By 10:30 in the morning, the October sun had finally burned through the gray clouds, casting a bright, glaring light across the Birchwood parking lot. The steering wheel of my sedan felt cold under my hands. The engine remained off, the windows rolled up tight. My phone rested against my ear as the line rang. Paula Mercer answered before the second ring finished. "I have been waiting for you to call since yesterday," Paula said. Her thick Cincinnati accent carried no warmth, only sharp practical efficiency. Paula never asked rhetorical questions, and she never wasted time on small talk. "What happened?" "The birthday party for Lily," I said, staring out the windshield at the brick facade of the building. "Lorraine slipped something into my drink." The line went completely dead for 2 full seconds. "Are you absolutely certain?" "The security footage confirms it, and Renee drank it." "Yes, she went to the urgent care clinic on Saturday night." The heavy thud of a binder dropping onto a desk echoed through the speaker. "I am driving up to Dayton on Wednesday," she stated. "You do not have to do that." "I am driving up on Wednesday," Paula repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Do you need someone to look at the joint finances with you? Because if they are preparing to divorce you, you need to know exactly where you stand right now." My eyes fixed on the large wooden sign planted near the road, "Birchwood Event Hall." "Paula," I said quietly, "I own this building." "I know," she replied without missing a single beat. "I am the one who set up the limited liability company for you. They do not know." Another long pause stretched across the line. A heavy, pregnant silence filled the space between Dayton and Cincinnati. "Ah," Paula breathed out. That single syllable held an entire conversation. Paula was a forensic accountant. Her brain processed variables faster than most people process oxygen. In that 1 second, she had run the math, visualized the commercial lease agreements, and arrived at the exact same conclusion currently sitting in my mind. The Norwood family was standing on a massive trapdoor, and they had absolutely no idea who held the lever. Later that evening, the house was so Vernon had come home at 11 at night, walking straight past my small home office without bothering to look inside or ask what kept me awake. That suited me perfectly. The yellow desk lamp illuminated my hands as they moved across the keyboard. A new folder appeared on the desktop screen. Birchwood, November. The exported video file went inside first. A document containing my personal notes followed, detailing the exact timeline of the party minute by minute. Finally, the digital guest list Lorraine had emailed me weeks ago for the printed name cards joined the collection. The document loaded instantly. Scrolling down the page revealed the necessary details. Helen Pratt, 14 Whitmore Lane, Beaver Creek. A new internet browser tab opened next. The search engine provided her phone number within seconds. The digits glared brightly in the dark room. My hand rested heavily on the mouse, the cursor hovering right over the contact information. I stopped. The call could wait. The rest of the pieces needed to be securely in place first. Closing that tab, I opened another one. A specific query went into the search bar. Ohio criminal law administering substance without consent. The results populated instantly. It was a felony offense. Class 3. A fresh document opened on the screen. Who did the prescription belong to? Zolpidem. Lorraine took heavy sleeping pills. She had complained endlessly about her terrible insomnia during our Thanksgiving dinner last year, practically demanding sympathy from the entire table. The details clicked together like the heavy tumblers of a bank vault lock. The note saved successfully. The laptop lid snapped shut, plunging the room into deep shadows. The clock on the wall read 15 minutes past 1 in the morning. Paula was arriving on Wednesday. The video footage was safely secured in 3 separate locations. The timeline was established. Exactly 1 week remained to build an impenetrable fortress of paperwork before anyone in the Norwood family even realized they were under siege. Standing up from the desk, I turned off the lamp and walked out of the room. The heavy rain started falling late Wednesday afternoon, washing over the Dayton suburbs in thick gray sheets. Vernon had left our house right at 6 o'clock in the evening. He stood in the kitchen doorway holding his car keys and announced he was going to his mother's house. He called it a necessary family meeting. The invitation was clearly not extended to me. I simply nodded, wiped down the granite island with a damp cloth, and walked over to lock the front door, the exact second his taillights disappeared down the wet street. Paula pulled into my driveway exactly 20 minutes later. She walked into my living room wearing a damp trench coat, dropped a massive leather tote bag onto the dark green carpet, and immediately demanded a pot of black coffee. We sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by 3 entire years of printed bank statements, tax returns, and digital spreadsheets. The single brass floor lamp cast a tight-focused circle of yellow light over the scattered papers. The only sound in the silent house was the rapid mechanical clicking of Paula typing on her laptop keyboard. She did not ask how I was doing. She knew I did not want to talk about feelings or emotional betrayals. I wanted to talk about mathematics. Numbers never lied. How much did the two of you put into the joint savings account last year? Paula asked. She did not look up from her glowing screen. Her fingers kept flying across the keys. I traced the ceramic rim of my warm coffee mug. I do not know the exact figure. Paula stopped typing instantly. The silence in the room stretched out thick and uncomfortable. She finally lifted her head and stared directly at me. You do not know. I never checked the joint household account, I explained. I kept my voice perfectly level and calm. I have my own business revenues safely secured in the limited liability company. Vernon always manages the daily household expenses. Paula let out a long, heavy breath that stirred the edge of a grocery receipt sitting on the carpet. All right, give me a minute to look closely at this. She turned her absolute attention back to the 18 months of transaction history. 4 complete minutes passed. I watched the thing secondhand on the wall clock sweep around the white dial 4 separate times. Paula's eyes tracked back and forth across her screen. She opened a new window, cross-referenced a set of routing numbers, and highlighted a specific column of data in bright yellow. Ren, Paula finally said. Her voice dropped into the exact tone she used when delivering severe audit penalties to her corporate clients. From April until October, your husband transferred $2,300 every single month into a private account that does not have your name on it. I did not blink. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, feeling the texture of my denim jeans. How many times did he do that? 7 times, Paula answered. She turned the laptop screen toward me so I could see the highlighted rows of evidence. $16,100 in total. I stared at the numbers glowing on the screen. They were just data points, but they painted a devastatingly clear picture. Which bank account did the money go to? I asked. I need more time to trace the specific routing numbers to a destination, Paula said, gently closing the spreadsheet application. But, Ren, you need to listen to me very carefully. He is actively preparing for divorce before you even know you are getting a divorce. I looked away from the computer screen and stared down at the dark green fibers of the carpet. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no sudden shock. There was no dramatic gasp of betrayal. I just felt a very quiet, very deep confirmation of everything I had been ignoring for the past 8 years of my life. I was genuinely surprised that I was not surprised. He was building a hidden safety net using our shared resources. He had been planning an exit strategy since the spring. Thursday morning brought clear skies and a biting bitter wind. I drove down the highway to Centerville to meet with Kate Sutton. Her law office sat tucked inside a small, unremarkable brick building overlooking a massive strip mall parking lot. The interior waiting room smelled distinctly of stale coffee, old paper, and expensive leather furniture. The dark green leather chair in her personal office squeaked slightly when I sat down. Kate had helped me set up my business structure 4 years ago. She was sharp, highly observant, and entirely devoid of useless sympathy. You mentioned over the phone that you have the security footage, Kate said, folding her hands on top of her immaculate wooden desk. I have the digital files right here, I told her, sliding a small portable drive across the polished wood. But you asked if I had managed to secure any physical evidence from the party. Kate raised an eyebrow. Do you have something physical? I set my purse on the floor, reached inside, and pulled out a small, completely sealed plastic storage bag. Inside the clear plastic sat the actual glass of Prosecco that Renee Norwood had left abandoned on the cocktail table. You kept the actual glass? Kate asked. She leaned forward, genuinely surprised. I wrapped it tightly in heavy plastic wrap the exact moment she walked away to the restroom, I explained calmly. I put it in the bottom of my bag while everyone else was watching my daughter open her birthday gifts. Kate picked up the sealed bag by the very edge. She inspected the pale dried residue crusted at the bottom of the crystal flute. She looked at the glass and then she looked directly into my eyes. You are an accountant. I am a certified public accountant, I corrected her gently. You know how to keep the receipts, Kate noted. A faint, genuine smile touched the corners of her mouth. You did exactly the right thing. I am going to send this to an independent forensic laboratory. Leaving her office, I felt the first real spark of momentum. The waiting period began. 5 entire days passed before the laboratory results finally arrived. For 5 days, I cooked dinner for Lily. I washed Vernon's laundry. I sat across the dining table from a man who was quietly stealing $2,000 a month from our family. I did not scream. I did not throw plates against the wall. I simply watched him exist, gathering the quiet strength I would need for the coming storm. The official laboratory report arrived in my secure email inbox late Tuesday afternoon. I sat alone at my kitchen island and read the attached document. The text was clinical and precise. The chemical identified in the dried liquid was zolpidem. It was a highly potent prescription sleep medication. The concentration found in the glass was exactly 20 milligrams. That specific dosage was more than enough to render a healthy grown adult completely incoherent and physically unstable for at least 4 to 6 hours. Later that same afternoon, I made a very specific phone call. I dialed the local pharmacy, located just down the street from the Norwood family home in Beaver Creek. I took a deep breath and adopted my most professional flat corporate accounting voice. I told the pharmacist on duty that I was currently balancing the annual medical expense accounts for Lorraine Norwood and needed to verify her recurring prescription schedule for tax deduction purposes. People rarely question a boring accountant doing boring paperwork. The pharmacist was incredibly helpful and eager to assist. Lorraine Norwood held an active prescription for 10 milligram zolpidem pills. The prescription strictly required a pharmacy refill every 30 days. Her last pickup occurred on October 28th. The birthday party took place on November 2nd. I ended the call and pulled out a fresh yellow legal pad. The math was incredibly simple, but I wrote it down anyway to see the truth in ink. Between October 28th and November 2nd, Lorraine should have consumed exactly 5 pills for her own insomnia. According to the standard dosage, there should have been 25 pills remaining in her plastic bottle. 1 pill remained unaccounted for in her normal routine. 2 additional pills were missing entirely. 2 10 milligram pills equaled the exact 20 milligram concentration discovered in the laboratory report. The equation balanced perfectly. My mother-in-law had used her own medication to poison my drink. By Friday night, the house was entirely silent. Vernon had fallen asleep early in the guest bedroom, claiming he had a headache from working late at the renovation site. His cellular phone sat abandoned on the edge of the bathroom sink, plugged into the white wall charger. The digital screen was completely dark. I stood in the doorway and looked at that small black rectangle. I could have easily picked it up. I could have guessed his simple passcode. I could have read every single message he had sent to his mother, but I was not that kind of person. I did not need to steal information in the dark like a criminal. I played by the rules because the rules were designed to trap people who thought they were above them. Paula knew people in the digital forensics industry. Kate knew exactly how to file the correct legal discovery motions to obtain communication records lawfully. I walked away from the bathroom sink and went to sleep. It took 9 full days for the official partial message thread to be recovered and delivered to Kate Sutton. She forwarded the secure transcripts to my private email late one evening. I opened the digital file sitting alone in my dark bedroom. The pale glow of the laptop screen illuminated my face. The house was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the central heating unit pushing warm air through the ceiling vents. The text messages were exchanged exclusively between Lorraine and Vernon. The digital timestamp read Saturday 4:52 in the afternoon. That was exactly 23 minutes before the birthday party began at the event hall. Are you absolutely certain she does not know about that building? Lorraine had typed. I am sure Vernon had replied to his mother. She never talks about the money from her grandmother. Good, Lorraine answered immediately. I will take care of it tonight. You just stand there and do not look. I read those 3 distinct lines over and over again. My eyes scanned the words until the letters lost their shape and became nothing but meaningless black pixels on a bright white background. You just stand there and do not look. He knew. It was not a sudden shocking realization on his part when she reached over my glass. It was not a moment of weakness or sheer confusion. He knew exactly what she was going to do before she even walked into the room. He had agreed to the plan. He had provided the necessary physical cover. I set the heavy laptop on the mattress beside me. The silence in the bedroom felt different now. It was no longer the silence of a sleeping house. It was the silence of a completely empty room. I did not cry. My chest did not heave with suppressed sobs. My hands were completely terrifyingly steady. I did not feel a single ounce of rage. I just felt a profound bone-deep sense of exhaustion settle into my shoulders. The man sleeping in the next room was a total stranger. I had spent 8 years of my life folding his laundry, cooking his meals, and raising his daughter. He was willing to watch his own mother drug me in front of 50 people, and his only role in the conspiracy was simply to look the other way. I needed to sleep. The upcoming week was going to require an immense amount of precise energy. There were legal documents to draft, financial disclosures to prepare, and a massive trap to carefully set. I picked up the computer one last time. I opened a new message window and addressed it directly to Kate Sutton. I checked the digital clock in the corner of my screen. It was exactly 11:47 at night. The cursor blinked steadily against the blank page. I have read the transcript I typed. I am completely ready. When do we begin the process? I pressed the send button. The email vanished into the digital void. I closed the laptop, plunging the bedroom back into absolute darkness, and finally closed my eyes. The weekend dragged through the Dayton suburbs in a state of suspended animation. I kept the house running on its normal schedule because routine was the only thing standing between my daughter and total confusion. I washed the laundry, folded the towels into perfect squares, and made blueberry pancakes on Sunday morning. Vernon stayed completely out of my way. He spent his entire weekend retreating to his renovation sites or visiting his mother. We moved around each other like 2 strangers, occupying the same hotel lobby, carefully avoiding eye contact and skipping over any conversation that did not involve grocery lists or school drop-off times. By Monday evening, the terrible waiting period was finally over. Kate Sutton had confirmed the next legal steps. Paula had finalized her forensic trace on the hidden bank accounts. The massive fortress of paperwork was complete. Now I needed to close out the personal ledger before the legal one opened. 8:30 at night brought a heavy absolute silence to the house. Lily was sound asleep in her bedroom down the hall, completely exhausted from a long afternoon of playing in the backyard. The television in the living room murmured quietly, casting a flickering blue light against the hallway walls. Vernon was out there watching a sports broadcast with the volume turned down low. I stood alone in the center of the kitchen. I had spent the last hour cleaning every single surface with a harsh chemical spray that smelled strongly of artificial lemons. The dark granite countertops practically gleamed under the bright, recessed lighting. I had put away the heavy wooden fruit bowl, the stack of incoming mail, and the decorative ceramic jars we kept near the stove. I wanted absolutely nothing sitting on the counters, no distractions, nothing that could be knocked over, nothing that could be thrown. I needed the room stripped down to its bare functional bones. I moved to the coffee maker and brewed a fresh pot. It was a deeply ingrained habit built over 8 years of marriage, making a warm cup for him whenever I made one for myself. I poured the dark liquid into 2 heavy ceramic mugs. I placed his mug on his usual side of the kitchen island. I placed mine directly across from it. Between the 2 steaming mugs, I set down a standard manila folder. It contained exactly 12 printed pages. I had carefully curated the documents that afternoon. I did not want to present a massive chaotic stack of paper that looked like a desperate attack. 12 pages was a concise summary. It was a finished audit report. I waited. The television in the living room clicked off, severing the low murmur of the announcers. Heavy footsteps moved slowly across the hardwood floor. Vernon walked into the kitchen, rubbing the back of his neck with his right hand. He stopped dead in the doorway when he saw the spotless granite counters, the 2 mugs of coffee, and the thin folder resting under the bright lights. "What is going on?" he asked. His eyes darted nervously from the manila paper to my face. "Sit down, Vernon." It was not a desperate plea, and it was not an aggressive command. It was simply a clear statement of the next required action. I kept my voice entirely neutral, devoid of any rising pitch or shaking anger. He did not pull out a chair. He crossed his arms over his chest, immediately building a physical barrier between us. "You are acting strange again." I did not rise to the bait. "Do you know what your mother dropped into my glass at the party?" He shifted his weight from his left foot to his right, his posture growing instantly defensive. "You are starting this nonsense again. I told you on Sunday she did not do anything." "I am not starting anything," I told him gently. "I am finishing it." I reached out and opened the folder. I pulled the first piece of paper from the stack and slid it across the smooth stone toward him. It was the official toxicology report from the independent forensic laboratory. Zolpidem, I read aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the empty kitchen. 20 milligrams. That is a very heavy dose of prescription sleep medication. It is enough to render a healthy adult completely incapacitated and physically helpless for 4 to 6 hours. Vernon stared down at the printed laboratory letterhead. He did not reach out to touch the paper. His arms remained tightly crossed. "Where did you get a sample to test?" I kept the glass of Prosecco that Renee drank from. I wrapped it up and took it with me. His jaw hardened, the muscles ticking just beneath his skin. "You have no right to steal things from a family event and send them to a laboratory." I did not argue about my legal rights. I simply pulled the second piece of paper from the folder and slid it directly over the first one. 4:52 in the afternoon, I said, tapping the printed text message transcript with my index finger. "Saturday, exactly 23 minutes before the birthday party started. Your mother asked you if you were absolutely certain I did not know about that building. You told her I never talk about the money from my grandmother. Then your mother told you she would handle things that night. She told you to just stand there and not look." The large refrigerator hummed loudly in the corner of the quiet room. Vernon stared at the transcript. All the natural color slowly drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly shade of gray. The confident defensive posture vanished in an instant. The aggressive edge completely melted away. He looked entirely hollowed out, staring at his own digital words printed in stark black ink. "Ren," he started, his voice cracking on the single syllable. "You stood there," I said, cutting through his hesitation with surgical precision. "You did not look. You smiled." There was absolutely nothing he could add to that sentence to change the reality of the room. He reached out his hand, shaking slightly, and pulled the tall wooden stool out from the island. He sat down heavily. For the very first time in our entire marriage, the polished mask of the perfect Norwood sun slipped off and shattered on the floor. He did not look like a confident project manager. He just looked like a terrified 39-year-old man who had finally run out of places to hide. He stared down at the black coffee cooling in his mug. "My mother just wanted." "You do not need to explain what your mother wanted," I interrupted calmly. "I need you to tell me exactly what you want." He looked up at me. A desperate, pathetic sort of hope flickered deep in his eyes. "I do not want a divorce." I nodded slowly, absorbing the statement. "All right." The hope flared brighter across his pale face. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward against the counter, his breathing hitching. All right, I understand that you do not want a divorce. I continue keeping my tone perfectly even and quiet. But if we are going to move forward, I need you to do one specific thing. I need you to go to the police station tomorrow morning and file an official statement about what you saw your mother do. The bright flicker of hope in his eyes died instantly, replaced by sheer suffocating panic. I already knew the answer. I knew it before I even printed the documents at my desk. I just needed to hear him say the words out loud. I needed the permanent, undeniable record of his final choice. Vernon stared at me in absolute horror, shaking his head. I cannot do that. I cannot do that to my mother. I reached across the counter and gathered the 12 pages. I tapped the edges against the granite to align them perfectly, then slipped them back inside the manila folder. The sound of the paper sliding against the cardboard was incredibly loud in the silent house. I know, I said. I picked up my coffee mug. I walked over to the stainless steel sink, poured the dark liquid down the drain, and rinsed the ceramic clean. I left his mug sitting on the island, completely untouched. Good night, Vernon. I walked out of the kitchen and down the short hallway to the master bedroom. I stepped inside, pulled the heavy wooden door shut, and reached for the small brass lock installed in the handle. A simple twist of my fingers secured the deadbolt. It was the very first time in 8 years I had ever locked a door inside my own home. The sharp mechanical click echoed through the quiet room, signaling the absolute end of the debate. The next morning, Vernon was gone before the sun even cleared the horizon. He had packed a small canvas overnight bag and left a vague scribbled note on the kitchen counter about staying near a renovation site to oversee an early lumber delivery. He was running away to the only safe harbor he knew. That was perfectly fine. I had my own errands to run. Rain fell heavily over the Dayton suburbs all through Tuesday morning, a cold and relentless downpour that turned the sky a bruised shade of purple. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, parked in the massive asphalt lot of the local supermarket. The engine was running, pushing warm air through the vents to combat the bitter October chill leaking through the glass. The windshield wipers swept back and forth in a steady, hypnotic rhythm, clearing the gray water only for the glass to immediately blur again. 2 plastic bags full of groceries sat on the passenger seat: milk, bread, fresh apples. Normal everyday items required to keep a 7-year-old child completely insulated from the collapse of her entire world. My cellular phone vibrated in the cup holder. The bright screen illuminated the dim interior of the car, casting a harsh white glow over the center console. The caller identification displayed a name I had not seen ring through to my personal device in almost 5 years. Lorraine Norwood. Vernon had gone straight to her house. Of course, he had. He had likely spent the entire morning sitting at her expensive dining table, crying about the printed documents I had left on the kitchen counter, begging his mother to fix the massive problem she had created. I let the phone vibrate 3 times against the plastic cup holder. Then, I swiped the scan and lifted the device to my ear. I did not say a single word. I simply listened to the empty static of the connection. Wren. Her voice was smooth-coated in a thick layer of artificial honey. It was the exact tone she used when speaking to difficult contractors or unruly vendors. She sounded entirely in control of the situation. I think we need to have a serious conversation. I am listening. You are overcomplicating a very minor misunderstanding, Lorraine said, her words measured and deliberate, dripping with condescension. I understand that you are feeling stressed lately. Motherhood is taxing. But bringing ridiculous printed papers into the kitchen to threaten your husband is not how a wife in this family behaves. We handle things internally. I watched a shopper in a bright yellow raincoat hurry across the wet parking lot, dodging deep puddles of standing water. Lorraine. I am not threatening anyone. I am simply presenting the evidence. A brief pause hummed over the line. When she spoke again, the fake honey was completely gone, replaced by cold, unforgiving steel. Do you know what your supposed evidence is actually worth if you do not have a brilliant lawyer? Lorraine asked quietly. A brilliant lawyer costs a tremendous amount of money that you do not have. You are a freelance accountant working from a spare bedroom. You have absolutely nothing. The rain drummed loudly against the metal roof of my car, sounding like 1,000 tiny hammers trying to break through the steel. You have absolutely nothing. Hearing her say those exact words did not make me shrink back against the leather driver's seat. It did the exact opposite. It anchored me firmly to the earth. I sat there in the gray morning light and thought about the massive Birchwood event hall. I thought about the commercial storage warehouse located on the Miamisburg Road. I thought about the 3 solid years of monthly rental checks deposited directly into the limited liability company account by her own family business. She had absolutely no idea who she was talking to. She was playing a high-stakes game of chess against an opponent she firmly believed was missing half their pieces. She saw me as invisible, and she was about to learn how dangerous invisible people could be. "Lorraine," I said, my voice softer and calmer than it had been in a decade. "Thank you so much for calling. So you are going to? I really have to go now. Have a wonderful day." I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button to terminate the connection. I dropped the phone back into the cup holder. I leaned my head against the headrest and simply watched the rain for 1 entire minute. The rhythmic sweeping of the wipers cleared the glass, blurred the glass, cleared the glass. The time for silent observation was officially over. I picked the phone back up. I bypassed my recent calls, opened my contacts list, and dialed Kate Sutton. The line rang twice before she answered. "I need to proceed," I told her the second she picked up. "I am glad you called," Kate replied immediately. Her professional tone was completely stripped of any normal pleasantries. She sounded like a soldier confirming coordinates on a battlefield. "I need you to drive to my office right now. Lorraine Norwood just filed an emergency motion with the county court." The drive from the supermarket parking lot to Centerville took exactly 22 minutes. I did not turn on the radio. The steady, heavy rhythm of the rain hitting the windshield of my sedan was the only sound I needed. The cold October storm had settled firmly over the Miami Valley, turning the afternoon sky a flat, unforgiving gray. Kate Sutton was waiting for me. Her receptionist did not even ask for my name, simply nodding toward the heavy wooden door at the end of the short hallway. I walked into the private office and took a seat in the dark green leather chair positioned across from the desk. The leather squeaked slightly under my weight. An 8-page legal document sat perfectly centered on the polished mahogany surface. Kate did not look agitated, but the index finger of her right hand tapped a slow, steady rhythm against the edge of the paper. "Lorraine did not file a criminal complaint about the powder," Kate said, immediately skipping any polite introductory remarks. "She is much too smart for that. Filing a police report would expose her to an actual investigation. Instead, she went directly to the family court. She filed an emergency motion demanding a full custody evaluation for Lily." I stared at the thick stack of white paper. The printed legal header looked formal and terrifying. "On what grounds?" "She is claiming that you are actively creating an unstable and emotionally damaging environment for a minor child," Kate explained. She picked up the document and flipped to the very last page. She included a sworn affidavit. "It is signed by your husband. Vernon states on the official record that you have become deeply paranoid, that you are secretly investigating his family, and that your current mental state makes you an unfit mother." The air in the office suddenly felt incredibly thin. I looked at the black ink on the page. Vernon has signed his name to that lie. He has sat in his mother's house listening to her dictate a narrative that painted me as a mentally unstable threat to our own daughter, and he had picked up a pen and signed it. "This motion is incredibly weak," Kate continued, setting the paper back down. "No judge is going to grant an emergency change of custody based entirely on an affidavit from an estranged husband with zero supporting medical documentation. But Lorraine knows that. She's not trying to win the motion today. She's trying to buy exactly 60 days of mandatory evaluation time." "She needs the delay," I said, the realization settling into my chest like a cold stone. "She needs 60 days to clean up." "Exactly," Kate nodded. 60 days gives her time to secure her medical records, time to claim the prescription bottle was lost or stolen, time to have the event hall wipe their security footage archives. It is a tactical stall. They are going to demand a full disclosure of your personal finances, hoping to drain your resources, paying me to fight a drawn-out custody battle. Kate leaned forward, folding her hands together. Which means I need to know absolutely everything right now, Ren. Every single asset you possess, even the things you never declared during your marriage. I looked at Kate for a long moment. I thought about the heavy silence in my house, the cold coffee in the sink, and the signed piece of paper on her desk. I have a limited liability company, I said quietly. Kate picked up a yellow legal pad and a silver pen. We set that up 4 years ago. Callahan Property. It was funded by the inheritance from your mother. Under Ohio law, that is considered separate property because it was established with inherited funds and kept entirely separate from the marital estate. They cannot touch the core capital. I know, I replied, but does the company hold any specific physical assets that the Norwood family might recognize? Kate asked, her pen hovering over the paper. I took a slow, deep breath. The scent of bitter coffee and old legal books filled my lungs. The company owns the Birchwood Event Hall, I told her, and it also owns a commercial storage warehouse located on the Miamisburg Road. The current tenant of that warehouse is Norwood Home Services. Kate stopped completely. She did not write anything down. She slowly lowered the silver pen to the desk. She stared at me, her professional composure fracturing just enough to reveal sheer unadulterated shock. By Wednesday morning, the rain had finally stopped, leaving the suburban streets damp and covered in fallen autumn leaves. I sat in my car in the driveway of my home, waiting for the heating system to warm the cold leather seats. I was preparing to drive to the bank to request 3 years of certified paper statements for the business accounts. My cellular phone vibrated against the center console. The screen lit up displaying an unfamiliar phone number with a local Beaver Creek area code. I almost ignored it. I was expecting a call from Kate regarding the opposing legal counsel. I picked the device up and answered with a simple flat greeting. I am looking for Ren Norwood, a woman said. Her voice was slightly hesitant, carrying the nervous energy of someone stepping into a room where they did not belong. My name is Helen Pratt. I found this phone number listed in the public county directory under the contact information for Callahan Property. I stopped reaching for the gear shift. I gripped the steering wheel tightly with my free hand. I remember you. You were sitting at table 4 on Saturday. I saw something I was not supposed to see, Helen said. The words tumbled out quickly, as if she needed to say them before she lost her nerve. I did not mention it to anyone at the party. I just wanted to leave. But I have visual proof. You took a photograph with your phone. That was not my intention at all, Helen explained, her breathing sounding slightly elevated over the speaker. I was actually recording a video for my oldest granddaughter. She lives out of state and could not attend, so I wanted to send her a short clip of Lily standing by the beautiful cake. My camera was angled across the room, pointing directly toward the main bar. I did not even realize I had captured that moment until I watched the video playback later that night in my own living room. The cold air blowing from the car vents washed over my face, but I did not feel the chill. I do not want to get involved in the private business of another family. Helen continued, her voice growing firmer. I really do not, but I have 2 grown daughters of my own. I laid in bed for 3 nights, thinking about what I would want someone to do if that had happened to one of my girls. If someone has a video of a woman being poisoned, they have a moral obligation to do something about it. She paused, the line growing quiet, except for the faint sound of traffic passing outside her window. I just need to know one thing before I hand this over, Helen asked quietly. Is the little girl okay? Is Lily safe? My throat tightened. The sheer, unexpected decency of a near stranger asking about my daughter hit me harder than any of Lorraine's calculated insults. She is perfectly fine, I managed to say, keeping my voice steady. Thank you so much for asking. Good. Helen breathed a heavy sigh of relief. Give me the physical address for your lawyer. I would drive the video there myself. Friday arrived with a brutal, biting cold that stripped the remaining leaves from the oak trees in the front yard. The house was completely silent. Vernon had not returned home since Monday morning. He had not called to ask about Lily. He had not sent a single text message. He was hiding behind the expensive skirts of his mother, waiting for his lawyer to make me disappear. I sat at the kitchen island with my laptop open. The bright screen was the only source of light in the dim room. I navigated to our joint banking portal, typing in the password I had memorized 8 years ago. The main dashboard loaded. The total available balance in the joint checking account was $847. I stared at the black numbers on the bright white screen. I moved my right index finger over the trackpad, slowly scrolling down to the recent transaction history. I knew the numbers were not a technical error. I just needed to see the exact timeline. There it was. $17,553. The transaction was a direct teller withdrawal. It had occurred on Wednesday at exactly 14 minutes past 2 in the afternoon. That was the exact same hour I was sitting in Kate Sutton's office discussing the emergency custody motion. While I was handing over the poisoned crystal glass, Vernon was standing inside a bank lobby, calmly draining every single dollar from the account we used to pay the mortgage, buy groceries, and fund our daily lives. He was legally authorized to do it. His name was on the account. Kate had explicitly warned me about this exact possibility during our very first meeting, but the legal wheels had simply moved too slowly to freeze the assets in time. I closed the browser tab. I sat perfectly still for 3 full minutes, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Then I opened a new tab. I logged into the separate commercial banking portal for the limited liability company. The dashboard loaded instantly. The balance sat in the high 6 figures. The 3 years of rental income from Norwood Home Services, the event hall booking fees, and the untouched principal from my mother's inheritance all sat there completely secure. I was not bankrupt. I was not destitute. I was simply under attack. There is a profound difference between being ruined and being struck. When I truly understood that difference, feeling it settle deep into my bones, I thought about my father. He had worked as a corporate accountant for 30 years. He was a quiet, methodical man who never demanded credit for his brilliant financial strategies. He always told me that truly good people did not need to be mentioned, that doing the right thing in the shadows was enough. I had deeply internalized that philosophy. I had applied it to every single day of my marriage. My father was wrong. He was not wrong because his work lacked value. He was wrong because choosing to remain invisible simply gave other people the absolute power to erase you. Being erased was not a noble sacrifice. It was just a massive gaping void that someone like Lorraine Norwood could easily fill with whatever fictional narrative she wanted. I picked up my phone and dialed the Cincinnati number. He drained the joint account, I said the moment Paula answered. There is roughly $800 left. The loud clatter of a keyboard stopped immediately. All right, Paula said. Her voice remained completely grounded, refusing to entertain panic. That is highly predictable behavior. Kate can handle it easily. Withdrawing the entirety of a shared account after divorce proceedings have officially commenced is a textbook dissipation of marital assets. The judge will force him to return your half, possibly with severe penalties. I know the legal mechanics, I told her, staring at the blank wall of my kitchen. Paula said, her tone softening just a fraction. Are you actually okay? I thought about the question. I searched my chest for the familiar rising panic that usually accompanied major conflicts. I found absolutely nothing. I had not shed a single tear in almost 2 entire weeks. It was not because I was exceptionally strong or burying my trauma. It was because every single ounce of my energy was currently allocated to dismantling a threat. I am fine, I answered truthfully. I just needed to hear a normal human voice for a minute. I am right here, Paula promised. You just keep talking. Lily gets off the school bus at 3:30 this afternoon, I said, reciting the schedule aloud. She needs her dinner by 6 o'clock. She has a reading assignment we need to finish by 7:30. Those things have not changed. And in the absolute certainty of those small daily requirements, I found the solid ground I needed to stay upright. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Lily was safely next door playing with the neighbor's children. I drove my car down the Far Hills Avenue corridor and pulled into the empty parking lot of the Birchwood Event Hall. I did not have any administrative tasks to complete. I did not need to check the security system or review the catering logs. I unlocked the heavy front doors, stepped inside the massive foyer, and simply stood there in the quiet shadows. The air smelled like old wood and cold, clean space. I walked slowly into the main ballroom. I looked at the high vaulted ceilings, the expensive lighting fixtures, and the polished oak floor. I did not turn on the lights. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long geometric shadows across the room. I stood exactly where Lorraine had stood when she tapped her glass and called me a leech. This building belonged to me. The ground beneath it belonged to me. The walls surrounding me were purchased with the money my mother had carefully saved for her only daughter. I stood in the center of the vast empty room and let the absolute reality of my ownership sink into my skin. They could take the grocery money. They could find fabricated court documents. They could run away and hide in Beaver Creek. But they could not take the ground I was standing on. My phone vibrated sharply in my coat pocket, breaking the profound silence of the hall. I pulled it out. Kate Sutton's name glowed brightly on the screen. "Hello, Kate. You need to come look at this immediately," Kate said. Her voice carried a sharp electric current of genuine excitement, a rare sound from a woman who spent her life dealing with miserable divorces. "I just received the preliminary financial discovery documents from the opposing counsel. They are trying to hide the true value of the family business." "How?" "They submitted the commercial lease agreement for their equipment warehouse in Miamisburg to prove their overhead operating costs are high," Kate explained rapidly. "The document clearly lists the landlord as Callahan Property. They handed over the signed contract themselves. They still have absolutely no idea who they are renting from." I looked down at the polished oak floor of my building. A slow, quiet breath escaped my lungs. The trap was fully set, and they had just handed me the final lock. The late Friday night air settled heavily over the Dayton suburbs, bringing a deep, absolute quiet to the house. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed bright green in the dark bedroom. It was exactly 11:47 at night. Vernon was not coming home. He had not stepped foot inside the house since Monday. Down the hall, Lily was sleeping soundly, completely undisturbed by the massive tectonic plates shifting beneath her family. I sat alone on the floor of the master bedroom closet. The carpet beneath me was thick and soft, but the air in the small enclosed space felt stagnant. A single overhead bulb cast a harsh yellow light over the hanging winter coats and stacked shoe boxes. I had not come into the closet looking for clothes. I had come to the very back corner, pushing aside a row of heavy wool sweaters to reach a space I had intentionally ignored for 4 entire years. A medium-sized cardboard box sat wedged against the baseboard. I pulled it forward. The bottom scraped softly against the carpet fibers. A thin layer of pale dust coated the top flaps. I ran my hand over the surface, feeling the dry, rough texture of the aged cardboard. My mother had packed this box herself. She had carefully folded the top flaps, tucking them into each other in a secure interlocking pattern that did not require any packing tape. She always folded things meticulously. Right in the center of the lid, written in her familiar faded blue ink, were 2 simple words: Patricia Personal. I rested my fingertips against the curved loops of her cursive handwriting. I had not opened this box since the week after her funeral. I had stored it away because the grief had been too sharp, too physically heavy to carry while trying to manage a household and raise a toddler. Eventually, the box simply became part of the background, a silent monument tucked behind the winter coats. I gently pulled the interlocking flaps apart. The cardboard groaned softly as the seal broke. The inside smelled faintly of dried lavender and old paper. The scent hit the back of my throat, bringing a sudden vivid flash of her kitchen in the summertime. I slowly unpacked the top layer. There were small stacks of old photographs held together by brittle rubber bands. There were holiday greeting cards from relatives who had passed away decades ago. There were a few manila envelopes containing property deeds and birth certificates. And right at the bottom, resting flat against the cardboard, was a single sealed white envelope. It was smaller than the others. The paper was thick and expensive. On the front, written in that same faded blue ink, was a brief instruction: "Rent red when needed." I picked it up. The paper felt heavy in my hands. My thumb traced the edge of the sealed flap. I did not know what she considered a time of need, but sitting alone on the floor of a locked bedroom while my husband plotted to take my daughter away certainly met the criteria. I slid my fingernail under the flap and broke the seal. Inside were 2 sheets of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was neat, sloping slightly to the right, exactly the way she always wrote her grocery lists and birthday cards. I leaned back against the closet wall, letting the cold drywall seep through my shirt, and began to read. My dearest Wren, I did not leave the limited liability company to you, just so you would have extra money in the bank. I left it to you so you would always have a place to stand. There is a massive difference between those 2 things. Money is temporary. It gets spent, it gets moved, and it gets lost. But land does not disappear. Land only changes hands. I wanted that specific ground to stay firmly in your hands. I see the way you live your life. I see you being so incredibly careful with the people around you. I see you yielding too much space, stepping back so others can step forward. I am not saying it is a bad thing to be kind. I'm simply saying that people usually only yield the things they are not entirely sure belong to them in the first place. If you truly know what is yours, if you know what nobody can give you and nobody can take away, you will yield differently. You will choose differently. You do not owe anyone your silence. You do not owe anyone your disappearance. If you are reading this letter right now, I am guessing you are currently in a situation where you need to be reminded of that fact. I lowered the 2 pages to my lap. I sat perfectly still on the closet floor. For 2 entire weeks, I had operated like a machine. I had collected forensic evidence, documented bank transfers, and built a massive legal fortress without shedding a single tear. I thought I was simply being strong. I thought I was surviving. But as I stared at my mother's handwriting, the tight, suffocating knot that had lived inside my chest for 8 years suddenly unraveled. I began to cry. It was not a hysterical, loud weeping. It was a deep, silent, physical release. Hot tears spilled over my eyelashes and ran down my cheeks, dropping quietly onto the denim fabric of my jeans. My shoulders shook. I was not crying because I was sad about my broken marriage. I was not crying out of fear of the upcoming custody battle. I was crying because my mother, a woman who had been gone for 4 years, had reached through time and spoken the exact words I desperately needed to hear. You do not owe anyone your silence. 8 years. I had stayed quiet for 8 years and proudly called it patience. I had called it maturity. I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was the ultimate virtue. I had swallowed Lorraine Norwood's subtle insult, ignored Vernon's constant cowardice, and made myself as small and agreeable as possible. My mother did not call that maturity. She called it a fundamental uncertainty about what actually belonged to me. I wiped my wet face with the back of my hand. The skin felt hot and raw. I knew what was mine now. I knew exactly what belonged to me, and I was absolutely certain of its value. Mom, I whispered out loud, my voice thick and ragged in the empty closet. I understand. I carefully folded the 2 sheets of lined paper along their original creases. I slid them back inside the thick white envelope and tucked it securely into the front pocket of my jeans. I did not put it back in the box. I needed to keep it closed. I pushed myself off the floor, my knees aching slightly from the hard posture. I walked out of the closet and picked up my cellular phone from the nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room. It was 12:23 in the morning. I sat on the edge of the mattress and opened a blank digital note file. The small keyboard glowed under my thumbs. I began typing out the exact list of items Kate Sutton needed for the upcoming legal meeting. First bullet point, the Birchwood lease agreement. Second bullet point, the Myamisburg warehouse rental history. Third bullet point, the toxicology laboratory results. I stopped typing and stared at the screen. I read the 3 items over again. They were entirely factual. They were completely devoid of emotion. I added a 4th bullet point, the bank dissipation record. Better. The list was complete. I plugged the phone into the wall charger, turned off the bedside lamp, and lay down in the dark. For the first time in 14 days, my mind was not spinning. The frantic, exhausting calculation phase was officially over. I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Monday morning brought a crisp, bright winter sunlight that reflected sharply off the remaining frost on the suburban lawns. I walked into Kate Sutton's private office holding 3 printed pages of perfectly organized notes. The environment inside the room was entirely different today. The air smelled of genuinely hot, freshly brewed coffee instead of the usual stale pot from the waiting area. Kate sat behind her massive mahogany desk, looking incredibly sharp in a dark navy suit. The sunlight streaming through her large window illuminated the organized stacks of manila folders surrounding her keyboard. "Good morning," Kate said, gesturing to the green leather chair opposite her desk. "I have good news regarding the schedule." I sat down, setting my 3 pages on the edge of the polished wood. "How fast can we move?" Kate leaned back, steepling her fingers together. "Normally the court cannot schedule a mandatory family mediation this quickly. The dockets are completely backlogged until January. But I utilized the pending criminal complaint regarding the zolpidem as leverage. I contacted Bradley Whitmore directly." "Who is Bradley Whitmore?" "He is the opposing counsel representing your mother-in-law and your husband Cade," explained, a faint glimmer of professional satisfaction appearing in her eyes. "He is very expensive and he is very smart." I informed him that a Class 3 felony investigation was currently active in Beaver Creek. I suggested that his clients might want to sit down at an emergency mediation table to resolve the civil family matters before the police officially knock on their front door. I nodded slowly, understanding the tactic. They want to finalize a settlement quickly to limit their exposure. "Exactly," Kate confirmed. Whitmore pushed the court for an emergency session. "We are officially on the calendar for this coming Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. We have exactly 48 hours to prepare." I pushed my 3 pages of notes across the desk. "I want to disclose absolutely everything during that meeting. The Birchwood property, the Mimesburg warehouse, the entire 3 years of commercial rent they paid directly into my company account." Kate picked up the pages, her eyes scanning the neat bulleted lists I had created in the middle of the night. She read through the information carefully, her expression remaining perfectly neutral. "They can easily claim they did not know who owned the company," Kate pointed out, tapping the edge of the paper. "They signed a contract with Callahan Property. They never saw your name on the lease documents. Legally, we cannot blame them for simply paying rent to an unknown corporate entity." "I'm not trying to blame them," I told her, keeping my voice low and steady. "I do not care about assigning blame for a legal technicality. I want them to look at the printed paper on the table and understand the reality of their own situation. Norwood Home Services has paid my mortgage every single month for 3 years. Lorraine personally signed a rental contract with my company to host a party in my building, and she stood in the middle of my property and called me a leech in front of 50 people." Kate lowered the papers. She looked at me for a long, quiet moment. The constant, rapid calculation in her eyes slowed down. "You do not want to go to a trial," Kate observed softly. "You just want that specific moment in the room." "I want her to sit in that small room surrounded by her expensive lawyer and a court mediator and figure it out," I said. My hands rested flat on the arms of the leather chair. Not because I want her to feel humiliated, because I need a single moment where the actual truth is spoken out loud clearly enough that absolutely no one can pretend they did not hear it. "Including Vernon?" Kate asked. "Including Vernon?" It was a crucial distinction. This was not about revenge. Revenge was a messy, emotional desire to cause someone else pain. I had no interest in causing pain. I simply wanted to remove the comfortable fictional narrative they had built around my life. I wanted the facts laid bare. Kate picked up her silver pen. "And regarding Lily, the custody arrangement, Lily has already spoken to the child evaluator," I reminded her, ticking the items off on my fingers. "Helen Pratt delivered the digital video footage to your receptionist on Thursday. The toxicology report from the forensic laboratory confirms the exact dosage of the medication." The official criminal complaint was filed with the Beaver Creek Township Police Department on Friday afternoon. Kate set the pen down. She shook her head slightly, a small smile breaking through her professional facade. "You have accomplished a terrifying amount of work in the last 2 weeks. I am a certified public accountant," I replied, standing up from the leather chair. "I know exactly how to handle the paperwork. Tuesday evening arrived with a quiet, heavy anticipation. The house was clean and orderly. The dishwasher hummed softly in the kitchen. I sat on the edge of the narrow twin bed in Lily's room, holding a brightly illustrated storybook in my lap. The small bedside lamp cast a warm, safe circle of light over the quilted blankets. Lily lay on her back, staring up at the ceiling. She had been unusually quiet during dinner, pushing her peas around the plate without eating them. "Mom," she said, softly turning her head on the pillow to look at me. "Why has Dad not come home for so many days?" I closed the storybook, keeping my thumb wedged between the pages to save our spot. I looked down at her dark, innocent eyes. I was not going to lie to her. I was not going to tell her he was just busy at work, and I was not going to make false promises about things returning to normal. "Your dad and I are rearranging some very important things right now," I told her, using a gentle, measured tone. "He's going to stay over at your grandmother's house for a little while." Lily processed the information slowly. Her small brow furrowed. "Are you and Dad not going to stay together anymore?" "Maybe," I answered honestly. "I do not know for sure yet." She fell silent. Her fingers traced the stitched pattern on the edge of her blanket. The concept of her parents separating was massive, but children possess an incredible heartbreaking capacity to accept the reality they are given. "Will I still get to see him?" she finally asked. "You will absolutely still get to see your dad," I promised, reaching out to smooth a stray curl away from her forehead. "That will never change." She nodded once, a small definitive movement. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I am perfectly fine," I smiled, and for the first time in a very long time, the smile was completely genuine. "I am just handling some adult paperwork." Lily accepted the explanation with a final nod. "Okay, can we finish the chapter now?" I opened the book and began to read. My voice remained steady and rhythmic, filling the small bedroom with a story about a brave rabbit traversing a dark forest. Lily's breathing gradually slowed down, evening out into the deep, heavy rhythm of sleep before I even reached the final page. I closed the book and set it carefully on the wooden nightstand. I reached over and clicked off the small lamp, plunging the room into comfortable shadows. I did not leave immediately. I sat there in the dark for 15 more minutes, listening to the quiet sound of my daughter breathing. Tomorrow morning was Wednesday. The mediation session was scheduled for exactly 10 o'clock at a neutral administrative office in Centerville. Lorraine was bringing Bradley Whitmore. He was an expensive, aggressive attorney hired to intimidate a quiet housewife into giving up her child and her financial stability. He was very good at his job. But Bradley Whitmore did not know about the video. He did not know about the laboratory report. And most importantly, he had absolutely no idea who actually owned the ground his clients were currently standing on. I stood up, kissed my daughter softly on the cheek, and walked out of the room. I was ready for tomorrow. The air inside the Centerville mediation office smelled exactly like stale coffee, recycled heating, and freshly printed paper. The room was small and entirely windowless, illuminated by a grid of harsh white overhead lights that cast sharp shadows across the center of the oval wooden table. The heavy door closed with a solid click, sealing us inside. Greta Hollis sat at the head of the table. She appeared to be around 50 years old, wearing tortoiseshell glasses that she looked through with absolute professional neutrality. She arranged her pens in a perfectly straight line, projecting a quiet authority meant to keep angry families from screaming at each other. No one was going to scream today. I sat on the left side of the table with Kate Sutton. Across the polished wood sat my husband, my mother-in-law, and their expensive attorney. Lorraine wore a tailored navy blue suit. Her hair was perfectly sprayed and pinned into place, every single strand aggressively controlled. The overwhelming chemical floral scent of her signature perfume had already claimed the small room before she even sat down. Her posture was rigidly straight. She looked entirely confident, projecting the aura of a woman who was simply attending a minor administrative meeting to collect what belonged to her. Vernon sat directly to her left. He kept his eyes locked firmly on the blank yellow legal pad resting in front of him. He did not look at me. He did not look at Kate. His shoulders slumped forward, and his hands remained flat on his lap, hidden beneath the table. Bradley Whitmore sat to Lorraine's right. He opened his thick leather briefcase, The metal clasps snapped loudly in the quiet room, sounding like a small gunshot. He arranged his documents with casual, dangerous precision. Greta cleared her throat, opening the floor. Whitmore did not waste a single second. My clients are formally requesting primary physical custody of the minor child, Lily Norwood, he stated, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. Furthermore, before we discuss any division of the existing marital estate, we are demanding a full unredacted disclosure of all assets currently held by the plaintiff. Kate did not flinch. She rested her forearms gently on the table. We completely agree with the demand for full financial disclosure. In fact, that is exactly where we would like to begin this morning. Whitmore paused, his brow furrowing slightly. He looked at Kate, expecting resistance. Greta simply nodded, granting permission to proceed. My client is the sole owner of a limited liability company named Callahan Property. Kate announced, her voice perfectly even and clear. The entity was established prior to the marriage and was entirely funded by a direct cash inheritance from Patricia Callahan. The company currently owns and operates 2 commercial real estate properties located in Kettering and Miamisburg, Ohio. I watched Lorraine. She did not react to the word company. She did not react to the mention of my mother. She simply blinked, her face retaining that mask of mild, wealthy irritation. She had absolutely no idea what those geographical locations meant. Kate reached into her dark leather satchel. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and placed it flat in the exact center of the oval table. The first commercial property, Kate said, her finger tapping the top edge of the document, is the Birchwood Event Hall located on Far Hills Avenue in Kettering. The registered owner is Callahan Property. The most recent short-term tenant on record is Lorraine Norwood, who executed a rental contract for a private event held on November 2nd. The rustle of clothing stopped. The faint hum of the overhead lights suddenly sounded incredibly loud. Whitmore reached out and pulled the paper across the table. He stared down at the printed words. Right at the bottom of the page sat Lorraine Norwood's own looping signature written in blue ink, officially renting the space from my company. I kept my hands resting quietly on my lap. My left thumb tapped against my thigh exactly 1 time. Then I held perfectly still. I watched the exact moment Lorraine realized what she was looking at. I wanted to commit this specific fraction of a second to memory. It was not a loud, dramatic collapse. It was the terrifyingly quiet visual of a woman watching her entire worldview fracture into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Her eyes flicked from the paper to Kate, and then finally they locked directly onto my face. The puzzle pieces slammed together in her mind. Birchwood Event Hall, Callahan Property, Patricia Callahan, the mother of the quiet, invisible woman sitting across from her. You, Lorraine whispered. Her voice was completely stripped of its usual artificial honey. You own Birchwood. I met her stare. I did not blink and I did not look away. I own Birchwood. I have owned it since 2021. You hosted the birthday party of my granddaughter, she breathed, her jaw trembling slightly as the reality crushed the air out of her lungs inside your own building. You rented my building for the party, I corrected her softly. Yes. A profound, suffocating silence fell over the room. Bradley Whitmore opened his mouth to speak, leaning toward his client to offer a whispered legal caution, but Lorraine completely ignored him. She was entirely paralyzed, trapped in the gravitational pull of her own staggering miscalculation. Kate reached into her satchel a second time. She pulled out a thick manila folder and dropped it onto the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. The second commercial property, Kate continued, her tone remaining completely conversational, is a large industrial storage warehouse located on the Miamisburg Road. The current long-term tenant of that warehouse is Norwood Home Services. They entered into a 36-month commercial lease agreement in January of last year. Vernon snapped his head up. It was the very first time he had lifted his eyes from his legal pad all morning. The blood drained from his face so fast, he looked physically ill. You, Vernon choked out the word, scraping against his dry throat. You own the equipment warehouse. I did not turn to look at him. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead. Norwood Home Services has paid $1,800 in rent to Callahan Property every single month for the past 30 months. The total revenue collected from your family business is exactly $54,000. Every single deposit receipt is fully documented inside that folder. Whitmore slowly lowered the birchwood contract to the table. He pushed his chair back an inch, creating physical distance between himself and his clients. He was a brilliant lawyer, and brilliant lawyers know exactly what it looks like when a trap snaps entirely shut. You need to remain silent, Whitmore ordered Lorraine in a harsh whisper. How long did you know? Lorraine demanded. She ignored her attorney completely, her hands gripping the edge of the wooden table so hard her knuckles turned stark white. Her eyes bored into mine. How long did you know I was renting the hall from you? I looked at the woman who had stood in the middle of my beautiful, expensive property and called me a leech while 50 people watched. I knew from the exact moment you called the administrative number to book the venue, I answered evenly. The telephone number you dialed routed directly to my dedicated business line. My property manager answered the call and took your deposit. I did not mention it to you because you never bothered to ask. Lorraine Norwood sat perfectly still in her brown leather chair. She did not say another word. The story she had lived inside for the last 8 years, the story where she was the wealthy matriarch, graciously tolerating a useless daughter-in-law, evaporated into thin air. It collided violently with the thick stack of paper resting between us. I looked at her face and I realized something strange. I did not feel the massive, overwhelming rush of vindication I had expected. I did not feel triumphant. I just felt incredibly tired and at the exact same time, lighter than I had felt in a decade. I glanced at Vernon. He was staring down at his own trembling hands. For 8 entire years, he had never once asked me what I did with my time while working from home. He had never asked what happened to the substantial inheritance my mother left behind. He never asked because he had already assumed the answer. He assumed there was absolutely nothing worth asking about. I realized in that small windowless room that I was no longer angry with him for his cowardice. I only felt a deep lingering pity for a man who was entirely blind to the world standing right in front of him. Greta Hollis quietly cleared her throat, shattering the frozen silence. I suggest we take a 15-minute recess to allow both parties to confer with their counsel. Whitmore stood up immediately. He grabbed Vernon by the shoulder, hauling the younger man out of his chair. Lorraine stood up slowly, her movements stiff and mechanical like a wind-up toy running completely out of energy. Before Vernon turned to follow his mother out the heavy door, he looked back at me. His eyes were wide and desperate. I really did not know, he whispered. About the company, I asked quietly. Or about what your mother dropped into my glass. He did not answer. He turned around and walked out into the hallway. I stood up and walked over to the small coffee station in the corner of the room. I poured a fresh cup of dark roast. The ceramic mug felt warm and solid in my hands. I took a slow sip. Across the room, Kate Sutton was organizing her files, a faint, deeply satisfied smile playing on her lips. When the door opened, 20 minutes later, the dynamic of the room had completely shifted. Whitmore walked in without his clients. He sat down, opened his briefcase, and immediately presented a comprehensive settlement offer. Lorraine formally withdrew her emergency motion for full custody. They agreed to a standard equal split of parenting time. The criminal complaint regarding the toxic powder was entirely separate from the family court mediation, and the local police would handle that matter on their own timeline. We have one additional stipulation, Kate said, smoothly sliding a fresh document across the wood. The joint household checking account was completely drained of $17,553 on Wednesday afternoon, well after divorce proceedings were initiated. That action constitutes a malicious dissipation of marital assets. That exact sum will be transferred directly back to my client before the close of business tomorrow. Whitmore looked at the document. He did not argue. He did not counter-offer. He simply pulled a silver pen from his pocket and signed his initials next to the demand. The paperwork was finalized and signed by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I walked out of the Centerville office building and stepped into the crisp, freezing winter air. I did not destroy Vernon. I did not take his daughter away from him. I simply took back exactly what belonged to me and I walked away. By 4:30, the winter sun was already beginning its steep descent over the Kettering skyline. I pulled my sedan into the empty parking lot of the Birchwood Event Hall. I walked to the side entrance, slid my heavy brass key into the lock, and pushed the door open. I did not bother turning on the main electrical breakers. The late afternoon sunlight poured through the tall arched windows, casting long golden geometric patterns across the polished oak floor. The massive room was entirely silent. The heavy wooden chairs were stacked neatly in the corners, and the round tables were covered in protective white cloth. My low heels clicked softly against the wood, the sound echoing upward toward the vaulted ceiling. The air smelled of clean wax and cold empty space. I walked slowly past the swinging door of the women's restroom. I walked past the small overflow tables. I walked straight to the center of the room and pulled out a chair at the main head table. I sat down. For 3 entire years, I had owned this massive, beautiful building, and I had never once sat at the head table. I had always stayed hidden in the cramped administrative office upstairs. I had managed the ledgers, paid the taxes, and scheduled the maintenance crews while remaining completely invisible to the people dancing on my floors. I had lived my entire marriage the exact same way. My father had told me that good people never needed to be mentioned. My mother had told me that I did not owe anyone my disappearance. 2 people who loved me completely had given me 2 entirely contradictory sets of instructions. I rested my hands flat against the cold wood of the table. I had lived by my father's rules for far too long. The sudden vibration of my cellular phone broke the deep silence of the empty hall. I pulled it from my coat pocket. Birchwood Paula said the moment I answered the call. Of course I am here, I smiled, my voice echoing slightly in the vast room. A brief, comfortable silence stretched across the line. Are you all right? I do not know yet, I answered truthfully. I think I am. I feel very empty right now, but it is a good kind of empty. It feels exactly like finally throwing away bags of garbage that have been sitting in the garage for a decade. What time does Lily get home? Paula asked. The neighbor is bringing her back from school at 5:30. Do you need me to drive up there tonight? No, I told her, watching the golden light shift across the floorboards. But thank you for offering. Thank you for everything. Paula said, her tone dropping its usual sharp edge, becoming incredibly soft. You did the right thing. She did not tell me that I won the battle. She did not tell me that I was brilliant or brave. She simply confirmed that the ledger was finally balanced. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I sat there for a few more minutes, soaking in the profound, undisturbed quiet of my own property. There was no soaring cinematic music. There was no massive celebration. There was just the steady, inevitable movement of the winter sun and the absolute certainty of the ground beneath my feet. I stood up. I pushed the heavy wooden chair back under the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge. I walked toward the main entrance. Right before I pushed the heavy double doors open, I stopped and looked back over my shoulder. The far wall was completely bare. The colorful birthday banner had been taken down 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, Lorraine Norwood had stood right there with a microphone in her hand and tried to erase my existence. 3 weeks ago, I had sat in the corner by the toilets and let her do it. Today, I sat at the head table, not because anyone offered me the seat, but because I owned the room. I stepped out into the freezing Ohio air. It was not a glamorous or exceptionally beautiful evening. It was just a cold, clear, realistic winter twilight. I took a deep breath, letting the sharp air fill my lungs completely. It was 10 minutes past 5. Lily would be walking up our driveway in exactly 20 minutes. I pulled my car keys from my pocket, the metal jingling brightly in the quiet parking lot, and walked toward my vehicle. There was a lot of work left to do, and I was finally ready to do it. You might spend years of your life believing that keeping the peace automatically makes you the bigger person. You bite your tongue at tense holiday dinners, you smooth over the sharp insults disguised as careless jokes, and you intentionally make yourself incredibly small just to avoid starting a massive argument. But shrinking yourself down to fit comfortably into someone else's fictional narrative does not ever earn you their respect. It simply teaches them that your personal boundaries are always negotiable. True strength is never about screaming the loudest or throwing heavy ceramic plates against the kitchen wall. It is about knowing exactly what solid ground belongs to you and absolutely refusing to step off it. Your silence should never be a blank check that you hand over to people who actively bankrupt your spirit. When you finally recognize the actual value of what you bring to the table, you stop accepting the leftover scraps they drop on the floor. Have you ever stayed quiet for years just to keep a difficult family together, only to eventually realize the peace you were desperately protecting was entirely one-sided? Tell me your story in the comments below because you do not owe anyone your silence anymore.